with the summit. I know I only have a short period of time, and I want to try and unpack quite a few things. But most importantly, I want you to at least take a look at my bio. And the only part of it that I want to reference is that I've worked both in the private sector and in government, as well as in the nonprofit sector, doing work that's really about community building. And the work that we do in economic development is all about community building and trying to create opportunities that are economically positive for all. And so I say that because what I really want to talk about is the economic development profession for a minute. And what is the economic development profession? Because that's the work that we do at the Beacon Council. And we like to define it as the intentional practice of improving a community's economic well-being and quality of life. So when you think about that, if we are successful and a community, in fact, does have an increased or improved quality of living and economic well-being, that should be something that applies to all. The reality is, in many cases, not everybody in a community, especially Black and brown folks in a community, often are not, in fact, a part of that economic prosperity, that quality of life that is improving. So if I had to think about, a message that made sense, is could I take that economic development definition of the intentional practice of improving a community's economic well-being and quality of living, could I take that and put an equity and inclusion filter on it? And would it mean exactly the same thing? So if I talk about how to improve life for Black and brown people in communities throughout South Florida in particular, could I use that same definition? And we go further to describe it as retaining, creating, and attracting high quality jobs. Well, we want to be connected to creating, retaining, and attracting high quality jobs. We want to be involved with fostering growth of a resilient tax base in our community, because if the tax base is solid, there's a lower tax burden on all of us. And so I reached the conclusion that, in fact, it's one and the same. Economic development and equity and inclusion, we can use the exact same definition to define what we want or what we are intentional about with respect to both. So having said that, I then said, could I, in fact, if I could just, rule the world, if I could just do what I wanted to do to help make a difference, what would the first thing be that I would do? I would probably try and prioritize economic equity as the number one thing to address. Because if I could address economic equity, then all the other issues and challenges that we deal with in our day-to-day lives, I think we have a much higher probability of addressing those. Think about it. In education and training, especially in high demand occupations right now, we're seeing artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality, fintech, biotech, and so many other technology sectors, many of which I'm sure a lot of this audience is actually involved with. And who knows what else. But if we could, in fact, create opportunities for us to be entrepreneurs, to be employed, to be leaders within some of these high demand occupations that are red hot right now and will likely be red hot going forward, we start to create that intentional improvement in our community's well-being and that intentional improvement in our quality of living. Now, of course, I always get pushback when I put this out there, because when I'm describing these high demand occupations, they tend to require a high degree of education and training. And the reality is not everybody's suited for that or even interested in that. And so I say, well, not every single person needs to be tied to one of these high demand jobs. But if those high demand jobs are prevalent within our communities, other jobs within our community will also enjoy a higher standard of living, because the individuals who live in our communities, those of us who live there, will have the ability to buy goods and services that are local and thereby create greater economic opportunity for all. When I think about ways to address the full spectrum of individuals, those who really want a high value, knowledge intensive profession, and those who want to move into other occupations that perhaps don't require as much education and training, how do we balance that, and how do we find opportunities for all? So I like to think about the trades in particular, middle skilled occupations, the skilled trades. These are things that were very popular back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even 90s. and then they fell out of favor for a long period of time. And what we're seeing now is that many of these occupations are back in high demand. But with that, there's also entrepreneurial opportunities in these same occupations that some of us can take advantage of if we choose to do so. I think about occupations like the construction trades. And here in South Florida, in Miami in particular, there are construction cranes everywhere. There's housing developments going in everywhere. So having either an entrepreneurial business in that profession or being an individual employee in that profession is likely to provide an an opportunity for economic prosperity for you and for your family. The second major thing that I think about once I get beyond this training and education and what the right criteria are, if you're an entrepreneur, you're going to need access to capital. And I like to think about access to capital a little bit differently than most. Most of us will talk about, venture capital, perhaps debt. I like to think about a good customer, a growing customer base. There's nothing, no quicker way to solve the capital challenges that we have than finding a good customer that pays on a reasonable schedule, right? And one of the other presenters talked about having a relationship with a customer that allowed you to be paid on fairly favorable terms, 15 to 30 days as opposed to 45 to 60 days. Those are the kinds of things that create, capital opportunities that don't necessarily require you to go to a bank or to some other investment vehicle if needed. But at the same time, we want to make sure that through our businesses, we're getting access to traditional debt and making sure that we have robust relationships with our financial institutions so that when there's time for us to grow our business and we have a significant new customer opportunity, our ability to go and get debt is not something that's going to challenge us over the long haul. Once we get beyond training and education and access to capital, there's also quality of living. And in many cases, that gets lost in the work that we do. And so I say, let's focus on, safety in our communities. Let's focus on housing in our communities. And then let's get to things like art, culture, recreation, and some of the other cultural amenities that matter. And the last thing that I think is important for us as we look to grow our businesses and look for professional opportunities is making sure that we have an appropriate digital footprint. And I do use the word appropriate because I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, and a few others. And I can tell you a lot of the stuff that I see, it's distressing because it's creating an image of us and you professionally that you might not necessarily want an employer or an investor even to pay attention to. But when we have appropriate digital footprints, it opens up a plethora of opportunities for us. When I think about the number of connections that I have and how many people reach out to me on a daily basis through one of the digital footprints or social media tools that I use, I'm absolutely amazed at how those connections turn into something really significant. Literally, just today, I had two individuals that I've been connected to over a number of years reach out to gain access to companies that are in my network. And I was able to seamlessly and easily make connections for them. So my message to the group is let's look at that definition of economic development and let's put an inclusion and equity lens on it. Let's think about being intentional in the practice of improving our communities so that the economic well-being and quality of living for all of us in our communities is as strong as we see in other places. Let's make sure that we're involved in the right education and training programs, that we understand how to get access to capital, that we understand that quality of living in our communities is critically important. And let's be sure to include an appropriate digital footprint. So I appreciate the time that you all have allowed me. And I do look forward to listening in on other parts of today's Afro Summit.
Thank you so much, Micah Finney. It was a pleasure to hear your remarks and your insights. And we look forward, of course, to staying in touch with you in the near future with the Afro Future community.
Thank you.